Most men heard Victoria Sterling's name and immediately started negotiating with themselves. The elevator climbed in complete silence. 61 floors above Manhattan, the glass walls reflected streaks of rain sliding down the city like silver lines against black steel. Marcus Hale stood near the back corner, one hand resting loosely near his jacket pocket, posture calm, steady, unreadable. Across from him, Victoria Sterling leaned lightly against the polished chrome rail, heels in one hand, bare feet against the dark marble floor of the elevator. The gala had ended 40 minutes ago, but traces of it still clung to her. The fitted red dress, the diamond earrings catching soft gold light overhead, the controlled expression she wore in front of investors and cameras. Except now it looked heavier somehow, tired around the edges. The city below them blurred through the rain. Victoria exhaled slowly without looking at him. "You know," she said quietly, "people usually try harder to keep conversations going around me." Marcus glanced toward the glowing floor numbers. "Maybe they're nervous." A faint smile touched the corner of her mouth. "And you're not?" No, the answer came too easily. That seemed to surprise her more than if he had flirted. Silence settled back between them, softer this time. Somewhere below, Manhattan kept moving. Yellow taxis cutting through rain, headlights reflecting off wet pavement. People rushing home to apartments too small or too expensive. But up here, inside the elevator, everything felt strangely removed from the world beneath it. Victoria studied him quietly now. Black single dad, 38. Former Marine recon according to the security file she definitely wasn't supposed to read herself. Temporary driver after her regular guy got hospitalized 2 weeks ago. Most employees treated her carefully. Marcus didn't. And somehow that bothered her more every day. The elevator slowed. Floor 61. The doors slid open soundlessly into a private hallway lined with soft amber lighting and dark stone walls. Victoria stepped out first, then stopped after 2 steps when she realized Marcus wasn't following. He stayed near the elevator. Calm. Professional. Creating distance again. She hated that more than she should have. "You can come upstairs," she said without turning fully toward him. Marcus looked at her for a moment. Not at the dress. Not at her body. At her face. That made something tighten unexpectedly in Victoria's chest. "It's late," he said calmly. "Exactly." Rain tapped softly against the enormous penthouse windows beyond the hallway. Victoria crossed her arms lightly, the fabric of the red dress shifting with the movement. "I'm offering you a drink, Marcus." Not a hostage situation. That earned the smallest, almost smile from him. Barely there, but real. And somehow that felt more personal than compliments ever did. Marcus stepped out of the elevator at last. The penthouse doors unlocked automatically as they approached. Warm light spilled across polished black floors and floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the entire city skyline. Expensive art. White marble. Silence. Too much silence. Marcus noticed it immediately. Places this big usually echoed with people. Family. Music. Television in another room. But this place felt untouched. Beautiful in the way luxury hotels were beautiful. Perfect. Cold. Victoria slipped off her earrings near the kitchen island and poured whiskey into 2 crystal glasses. Her movements remained graceful, controlled, but Marcus noticed her hand pause for half a second while lifting the bottle. Tiny hesitation. Tiny crack. "You always this quiet?" she asked softly. Marcus stayed near the windows, looking out over the rain-covered city below. "Only when people are trying too hard not to be lonely." The room went still. Victoria slowly turned toward him. For the first time all night, her expression faltered completely. And somewhere deep beneath the billionaire composure, Marcus saw it. Not arrogance. Not seduction. Exhaustion. Real exhaustion. Victoria lowered her glass carefully onto the marble counter. "Don't leave yet," she said quietly. And this time, it didn't sound like an invitation at all. Victoria looked away first. That was what Marcus noticed. Not the penthouse. Not the skyline stretching across Manhattan in silver and gold reflections beneath the rain. Her. People like Victoria Sterling usually held eye contact too long on purpose. It was part of how they controlled rooms. Negotiations. Interviews. Investors. But after what he said, she turned toward the kitchen island instead, shoulders tightening slightly beneath the red fabric of her dress as she reached for the whiskey again. "You always analyze people this much?" she asked quietly. Marcus stayed near the windows. "Occupational habit." Marine recon? He glanced toward her. You read my file. Victoria poured slowly. I read everybody's file. That sounds exhausting. That almost made her smile again. Almost. The penthouse remained quiet except for rain tapping gently against the glass walls 40 feet away. Marcus let his eyes move across the room once more. White marble countertops untouched by real cooking. Bookshelves arranged too carefully to actually belong to readers. A dining table large enough for 12 people sitting perfectly clean beneath dim pendant lights. No framed photos anywhere. Not even hidden ones. The place did not feel lived in. It felt maintained. Preserved. Like somebody built a museum version of success and forgot to place a human being inside it. Victoria slid one of the whiskey glasses across the island toward him. You can relax, Marcus. I am not planning to interrogate you. He walked over slowly and took the glass, though he barely drank from it. Victoria noticed that too. She noticed everything. That was probably how she built a company worth billions before turning 35. Most people get uncomfortable in places like this, she said. You do not seem impressed. Marcus leaned lightly against the counter. Should I be? Usually helps. With what? Victoria took a slow sip before answering. Keeping people predictable. There it was again. Tiny honesty hidden beneath polished conversation. Marcus watched her carefully now. White woman. Billionaire. Beautiful in the controlled way magazine covers loved. But exhaustion sat behind her eyes tonight, like she had not slept properly in months. You should probably get some rest, he said quietly. Victoria laughed once under her breath. That obvious? You stopped. Pretending about 20 minutes ago. Silence settled between them again. Softer this time. More dangerous somehow. Victoria moved around the kitchen island slowly, bare feet silent against black marble floors. The red zipper dress shifted with each step, elegant without trying too hard. She stopped beside the windows, looking down at the rain-covered streets 61 floors below. Do you know what everybody said after tonight's gala? She asked quietly. Marcus stayed where he was. No, they said I looked unstoppable. Her reflection stared back at her in the glass. Calm billionaire face. Perfect posture. Controlled voice. Funny thing is, she paused there. Long enough for the rain to fill the silence. I could barely breathe halfway through dinner. Marcus said nothing. She seemed to appreciate that. Most people rushed to comfort discomfort because silence made them nervous. Marcus understood silence better than conversation. Victoria crossed her arms lightly against herself, staring down at the city below. You know what I hate most about rich people? She asked. What? Nobody ever lets you be tired. Marcus finally took a small sip from the whiskey glass. That sounds lonely. Victoria looked at him immediately after he said it. Not defensive this time. Just caught off guard. The kind of reaction people had when somebody accidentally touched the truth too directly. Lonely, she repeated quietly. Marcus nodded once. This place is too expensive to feel this empty. For a second, Victoria looked like she might say something sharp back. Something billionaire and polished and untouchable. But instead she just lowered her eyes toward the glass in her hand. You really do see too much, she said softly. Marcus glanced toward the elevator behind him. Comes with raising a daughter alone. Victoria studied him carefully now. Different than before. Less curiosity. More focus. How old is she? 7. A small smile touched his face for the first time all night. Real this time. Ava. Victoria noticed the change instantly. The warmth in his voice. The way his shoulders relaxed slightly, just saying his daughter's name. Something inside her shifted quietly at that moment. Something dangerous. Because she suddenly realized this man had something money never managed to buy for her. Somebody waiting for him to come home. Victoria had spent most of her life learning how to keep people useful. That was the dangerous part. Somewhere along the way, useful had started feeling close enough to love. She stood quietly near the windows while rain rolled down the glass in slow silver trails behind her. Marcus remained near the kitchen island, relaxed but alert in the way military men sometimes carried themselves even years after leaving service. The penthouse lights reflected softly against the dark city skyline, turning the entire room gold and black. Expensive. Elegant. Empty. Victoria picked up her whiskey again, but did not drink it this time. Instead, she studied Marcus carefully, almost like she was trying to solve something that refused to fit into numbers or contracts. You know, she said softly, most people hear who I am and immediately start asking for things. Marcus looked toward her calmly. That sounds exhausting too. A faint breath escaped her nose. Not quite laughter. Usually it is less subtle than this. She walked slowly toward the kitchen island, fingers resting lightly against the marble surface as she moved. The red dress shifted softly with each step, catching warm light along the zipper line near her shoulder. Bigger apartment, better position, investment money, connections. She shrugged lightly. Sometimes all of them at once. Marcus nodded once. And you always say yes? Depends how honest they are about it. Silence settled again. Comfortable this time. Victoria noticed that too. Most people rushed to fill silence around her because they wanted approval. Marcus seemed perfectly fine letting the room breathe. That made her strangely aware of him. I could help you, you know, she said finally. Marcus lifted his eyes toward her. There it was. The shift. Subtle. Controlled. But intentional. Victoria straightened slightly before continuing. You are raising a daughter alone in New York on a temporary security contract. She spoke carefully now, business voice returning piece by piece. You are overqualified for what you currently do. Marcus stayed still. Victoria moved closer to the counter and set her glass down beside his untouched whiskey. I could offer you something permanent. Her tone softened slightly on the last word. Permanent. Full security director position. She folded her arms lightly. 6 figures. Flexible hours. Private apartment upstairs for you and Ava. Marcus did not answer right away. Victoria suddenly hated how much she cared about his reaction. Her school tuition would be covered, she added quietly. Health insurance too. Marcus looked down briefly at the whiskey glass in his hand before setting it aside untouched. That is generous. Victoria watched him carefully. But he glanced toward the windows again. Rain still falling across Manhattan. Endless lights below them. Endless people trying to survive the city one way or another. You are offering me comfort very fast for somebody who barely knows me. Victoria crossed one arm tighter against herself. I know enough. Marcus looked back at her then. Calm. Direct. The kind of eye contact that felt honest instead of performative. No, he said quietly. You know enough to keep me nearby. The room went completely still. Victoria blinked once. That landed harder than she expected. Because the terrifying part was not that he accused her of it. The terrifying part was that she realized he might be right. You think this is manipulation? She asked softly. Marcus shook his head immediately. No, he paused there, choosing the next words carefully. I think this is the only way you know how to ask somebody not to leave. Victoria looked away first again. Her jaw tightened slightly as she stared toward the rain-covered skyline behind him. Somewhere beneath the billionaire confidence, something fragile moved quietly across her face before disappearing. You really do see too much, she whispered. Marcus exhaled softly. Comes from watching people disappear when life gets hard. Victoria swallowed once. Then, almost too quietly to hear, she asked, and they stayed gone? Marcus looked down for a moment before answering. Most of them. For the first time that night, Victoria stopped looking like a billionaire entirely. She just looked tired. Marcus knew the conversation should have ended there. That was the smart thing. Finish the drink. Leave politely. Go home to Queens before Ava woke up asking why he smelled like rain again. But something about Victoria standing in front of those massive windows made it harder to walk away than it should have been. Not because she was beautiful, although she was. It was the loneliness. Honest loneliness was harder to ignore than attraction ever had been. Victoria moved slowly back toward the kitchen island, wrapping both hands lightly around the whiskey glass now like she needed something solid to hold on to. The confidence was still there, the billionaire composure, but it no longer looked effortless. Marcus noticed the difference immediately. You do not have to stay because you feel bad for me, she said quietly. I do not. Good. She took a sip finally. I would hate that. Marcus looked toward the rain sliding down the glass walls again. You seem to hate a lot of things. A faint smile appeared. Tired. Real. Comes with managing 6,000 employees. 6,000 sounds like a lot of meetings. That earned a soft laugh from her this time, small enough that it almost disappeared beneath the rain. You know, she said, most people around me try very hard to sound impressive. Marcus shrugged lightly. That sounds exhausting too. Victoria lowered her eyes briefly into the whiskey glass. You keep saying that word. Because you keep describing a life that sounds exhausting. Silence settled again, comfortable in strange ways neither of them fully understood yet. Marcus checked the time on his phone automatically. 2:41 a.m. He should leave. Ava would be awake in 4 hours wanting pancakes before school. Victoria noticed the movement immediately. You really are thinking about going home already. My daughter gets upset if I miss breakfast. Victoria leaned lightly against the marble counter, studying him carefully now. Every morning? Most of them. Even with your work schedule? Marcus nodded once. She likes routine. Something moved quietly across Victoria's face at that answer. Not jealousy exactly. Something sadder. Nobody ever waited for me like that, she said softly before she could stop herself. The room grew still after that. Victoria looked annoyed with herself almost immediately, like honesty had slipped out accidentally. Marcus stayed quiet, letting her take the words back if she wanted to. But she did not. My father believed schedules mattered more than people, she continued quietly. Meetings, deals, reputation. Her fingers tightened slightly around the glass. Everything in our house ran on timing, including affection. Marcus listened without interrupting. Victoria laughed softly under her breath. That sounds dramatic when I say it out loud. No, Marcus said calmly. It sounds practiced. That made her look at him again, directly this time. Practiced? Marcus nodded, like somebody who got used to explaining why being alone does not bother them. Victoria held his eyes for a second too long before looking away toward the city again. Rain covered Manhattan in silver reflections below them. Somewhere downtown, sirens echoed faintly through the night. The world kept moving. But inside the penthouse, time felt slower somehow. Do you know what the strange part is? Victoria asked quietly. What? I built all this because I thought eventually it would feel safe. She gestured softly around the penthouse. The marble, the skyline, the impossible view. But sometimes I think the bigger this place got, she stopped there. Marcus finished it for her anyway. The emptier it felt. Victoria swallowed once. Yeah. Marcus looked toward the elevator again, then back at her. Money makes life easier, he said quietly, but it does not automatically make it less lonely. Victoria stared at him in complete silence after that, because every man she had ever met either wanted something from her or feared her enough to lie. But Marcus did neither. He just told the truth calmly and left her alone with it. And somehow that felt far more dangerous. Victoria had not meant to say that much. That was the problem with exhaustion. It loosened things people spent years trying to keep hidden. She stood quietly near the windows now, arms folded, lightly against herself while rain painted shifting silver patterns across the glass behind her. Marcus stayed near the kitchen island, steady and calm in a way that somehow made the giant penthouse feel smaller, more honest. Victoria hated how quickly she had started noticing his silences. You should probably go home, she said softly after a while. Marcus looked toward her. You want me to? She opened her mouth immediately, then stopped. The hesitation lasted maybe 2 seconds. But Marcus noticed it anyway. Of course he did. Victoria looked down at the whiskey glass in her hand instead. No, she admitted quietly. The honesty surprised both of them. Rain continued tapping softly against the windows. Somewhere below, Manhattan glowed like another universe entirely. Marcus slipped one hand into his jacket pocket. You know, he said calmly, most people do not ask strangers to stay after 2 in the morning. A faint smile touched Victoria's face. Good thing you are not most people. Marcus almost smiled back. Almost. That tiny restraint somehow affected her more than confidence ever could. Victoria moved slowly toward the kitchen island again, bare feet silent against the marble floor. The red dress caught warm light with every movement, elegant but effortless now that she had stopped performing for cameras and investors hours ago. I am serious about the position, she said quietly. Business voice returning again. Safer territory. Security director. Full salary package. Flexible scheduling around Ava. Marcus remained still. Victoria continued carefully, like she had rehearsed negotiations her entire life and did not know any other language when things became emotional. Private guest suite upstairs. Separate entrance if you want privacy. School tuition covered. Transportation. Healthcare. Marcus listened without interrupting. Victoria lowered her voice slightly. You would not have to worry anymore. There it was. The real offer hidden beneath the money. Safety. Stability. Relief. Things single parents rarely turn down. Marcus looked toward the city for a long moment before answering. You really believe money solves fear? Victoria crossed her arms. Lightly again. Does not it? Marcus shook his head slowly. It solves bills. Silence. Victoria felt something tighten unexpectedly in her chest. Because nobody around her spoke this plainly anymore. They adjusted themselves around her wealth, around her influence, around the possibility of gaining something. Marcus did none of that. "You think I am trying to control you," she said softly. "No," his answer came immediately. "Then what?" Marcus finally looked directly at her again. Calm eyes. Honest eyes. "I think you are trying to make sure I stay close enough that you do not have to feel this place when it gets quiet." The words landed hard. Victoria looked away instantly, jaw tightening. "That is not fair." Marcus nodded once. "Probably not. You do not know me." "No," he said calmly. "But I know what loneliness sounds like when people try to cover it with comfort." Victoria stared down at the marble floor for several seconds without speaking. The penthouse suddenly felt too still around her. Too large. Too exposed. "You really are impossible to buy," she whispered softly. Marcus leaned lightly against the counter. "That depends what somebody is offering." Victoria lifted her eyes toward him again. Something vulnerable flickered there before she buried it beneath composure. "And what would matter to you?" Marcus answered without hesitation. "Peace." The room went completely silent after that. Because Victoria Sterling had spent most of her adult life around people chasing more money, more power, more status, more access. But standing in front of her now was a man who looked at a multi-million-dollar penthouse and asked for peace instead. And somehow that made him feel completely out of her reach. Victoria had spent years mastering rooms full of powerful men. Politicians, investors, founders, athletes, men twice her age who folded under pressure once negotiations started. But standing inside her own penthouse at nearly 3 in the morning, she realized something unsettling. Marcus Hale was the first man in years who seemed completely comfortable leaving her. That thought stayed with her longer than it should have. She leaned back lightly against the marble counter, arms crossed softly now, whiskey untouched beside her. "Peace," she repeated quietly. "That is what matters to you." Marcus nodded once. "Most people only start valuing peace after life scares them enough." Victoria studied him carefully. "And life scared you?" Marcus looked down briefly before answering. "Yeah." Simple answer. No performance around it. No dramatic story. Somehow that honesty felt heavier than details would have. Rain continued sliding down the glass walls behind them, while Manhattan glowed below in blurred silver and gold reflections. Victoria watched him for another long moment. Calm posture, controlled breathing, steady eyes. Everything about him felt grounded in ways money could not create. "You know what I think is funny?" she asked quietly. Marcus waited. "Everybody around me wants access to this life." She gestured softly toward the penthouse around them. The view, the money, the connections. A faint smile touched her lips without warmth. "You are standing inside it right now looking like you would rather be somewhere else." Marcus answered honestly. "I would rather be asleep." That caught her off guard enough to laugh softly again. Real laughter this time. Brief, but genuine. The sound faded quickly, though. "You really are different." Marcus tilted his head slightly. Different usually just means harder to control. The words landed immediately. Victoria's expression shifted before she could stop it. Tiny crack. Tiny sting. Marcus noticed both. "You think I control people," she said quietly. "I think you learned early that if you provide enough comfort," he paused carefully, "people stay longer." Victoria looked toward the windows again. "And if that is true?" Marcus stayed silent for a second before answering. "Then eventually you stop knowing whether they stayed for you, or for what came with you." The room went completely still after that. Victoria lowered her eyes slowly. Because that was the part nobody ever said out loud. Every relationship in her life eventually turned transactional. Business disguised as affection. Loyalty tied to benefits. Attention attached to access. Marcus walked toward the windows slowly now, hands resting loosely in his pockets while rain streaked across the skyline beyond him. "Ava used to ask me something after her mom died," he said quietly. Victoria looked up immediately. His voice had changed again. Softer now. More personal. "What?" She used to ask if people only leave when something better shows up. Victoria felt her chest tighten unexpectedly. Marcus stared down at the city below while speaking. "Took me a long time to answer that question honestly." Silence filled the room again. Heavy this time. Victoria moved closer without realizing it at first, stopping a few feet beside him near the glass. "And what did you tell her?" Marcus looked at his reflection in the rain-covered window. "I told her good people stay because they want to." Victoria swallowed once. Slowly. That sounds nice. Marcus glanced toward her. Kids deserve stable things to believe in. The closeness between them suddenly felt different standing there near the windows. Not romantic. Not flirtation. Something quieter. More dangerous. Honest proximity. Victoria looked up at him carefully. And what if somebody does not know how to make people stay without offering something? Marcus held her gaze for several seconds. Long enough that she almost looked away first again. Then eventually, he said softly, they start believing they are only valuable when they are useful. Victoria stopped breathing for half a second. Because no investor, no therapist, no man she had ever dated had explained her life that clearly in one sentence. And the terrifying part was how relieved she suddenly felt being understood. Victoria looked away toward the city because holding his gaze suddenly felt too personal. Rain drifted across the glass in slow, uneven patterns while the skyline blurred beneath it like watercolor lights melting into darkness. She wrapped her arms lightly around herself without realizing it. Not cold, just exposed in ways she had not expected tonight. Marcus stayed beside the windows, calm and still, giving her room to breathe without stepping away completely. That balance unsettled her more than pressure ever could. You make everything sound simple, she said quietly after a while. Marcus shook his head once. No, just honest. Victoria let out a slow breath through her nose. Honest usually gets expensive around people like me. Marcus glanced toward her. Then you are around the wrong people. Silence followed immediately. Heavy silence this time. The kind that pressed against old wounds people usually kept hidden beneath schedules and routines and expensive distractions. Victoria stared down at the whiskey glass in her hand. You know what the funny part is? She asked softly. Everybody thinks money gives you choices. Marcus waited. But eventually, she paused there. Choosing the words carefully now. Eventually, it just makes people afraid to tell you the truth. Marcus understood that immediately. He could hear it in her voice. Not arrogance. Fatigue. Because they need something, he said quietly. Victoria nodded once. Or they are scared of losing access. She laughed softly under her breath. Bitter this time. Do you know how exhausting it is wondering if people are kind because they care about you, or because your last name opens doors? Marcus looked toward her carefully. Probably very. Victoria finally met his eyes again. And yet somehow you are standing here acting like none of this impresses you. Marcus shrugged lightly. I have seen enough life to know expensive things do not automatically mean meaningful things. Victoria looked down again after that. Because he kept doing it. Saying exactly the thing nobody around her ever said. The truth. Simple. Calm. Unpolished. Dangerous. Her phone buzzed suddenly against the marble counter. The sharp vibration cut through the quiet room. Victoria glanced toward the screen. Board members. 3 missed calls already. Another incoming message. She ignored all of it. Marcus noticed immediately. That seems important. It can wait. At 3 in the morning? Victoria gave a tired half smile. That is usually when billion-dollar problems show up. Marcus nodded slowly. And you handle all of them yourself. Usually. That sounds lonely too. Victoria laughed softly again, but this time it cracked near the end. Tiny fracture in the sound. She picked up the phone finally, stared at the glowing screen for 2 seconds, then turned it face down against the marble without answering. Do you ever get tired of carrying everybody? Marcus asked quietly. Victoria froze slightly at the question. Because nobody asked her things like that. People asked what she wanted, what she planned, what she was building next. Nobody asked if she was tired. She swallowed once before answering. You do not get to stop when too many people depend on you. Marcus looked toward the rain-covered skyline. That is what I used to tell myself too. Victoria studied him carefully now. What changed? Marcus stayed quiet for several seconds before answering. Ava. Just her name softened him again. Victoria noticed every time it happened. The way his shoulders loosened. The way his voice lowered naturally. Nothing forced. Nothing performed. Real care. Real presence. Kids make you honest fast, he continued quietly. They notice when your body is in the room, but your mind is somewhere else. Victoria lowered her eyes slowly. I do not think anybody ever noticed when I disappeared. Marcus looked at her then. Directly. Calmly. I think they probably did. The room went still again. Victoria held his gaze this time instead of looking away. And for one dangerous second, standing there beneath the soft amber lights with rain covering Manhattan behind them, she stopped feeling like a billionaire entirely. She just felt like a woman who had been lonely for a very long time. Neither of them spoke for a while after that. The silence felt different now, less guarded, more dangerous. Victoria stood near the windows with one arm wrapped lightly across herself, while the rain softened outside into a slow silver mist over Manhattan. Marcus remained beside her, close enough to feel present, but never close enough to pressure her. That balance kept unsettling her. Most people either wanted too much from her or feared her too much to act naturally. Marcus did neither. He just existed beside her honestly. And somehow that made the enormous penthouse feel quieter than before. Victoria glanced toward the clock on the wall. 3:18 a.m. You should really leave before your daughter wakes up and starts wondering where you are, she said softly. Marcus nodded once. Probably. But neither of them moved. Victoria noticed that immediately. So did he. A faint smile touched her lips for half a second. You are still here. Marcus looked toward the city lights below. Yeah. She studied him carefully now. Why? Marcus stayed quiet for several seconds before answering. Because you stopped acting like a billionaire about an hour ago. That caught her off guard enough to laugh softly again. Warmer this time. Real enough that she had to look down afterward. That might be the strangest compliment I have ever received. Probably because most people are too busy trying to impress you. Victoria slowly shook her head. You really think everybody around me is pretending? Marcus looked toward her calmly. I think people adjust themselves around power. The honesty in his voice made her chest tighten again. No hesitation. No manipulation. Just truth. Victoria walked slowly toward the kitchen island and rested both hands against the marble surface. Do you know what the worst part is? She asked quietly. What? After a while, she stared down at the untouched whiskey beside her. You stop knowing who likes you and who likes what comes with you. Marcus watched her carefully now. She looked smaller somehow standing there beneath the soft kitchen lights. Not physically, emotionally. The billionaire image kept slipping tonight in tiny moments she could no longer fully control. That sounds tiring, he said softly. Victoria smiled faintly without looking up. You really like that word. Because tired people usually need honesty more than advice. That made her look at him again immediately, directly, long enough that the room suddenly felt smaller around them. Rain rolled softly against the glass while the city lights flickered across her face in gold reflections. You know what scares me? She asked quietly before she could stop herself. Marcus waited. Victoria swallowed once. I do not actually know how to let people stay without making myself useful to them. The words landed heavily between them. Honest. Unprotected. Marcus looked down briefly before answering. That is not the same thing as being unlovable. Victoria's eyes dropped immediately after hearing that. Too fast. Too emotional. She turned slightly away toward the windows again, one hand brushing lightly against her forehead like she suddenly felt tired enough to collapse. You say things like that very casually, she whispered. Marcus leaned lightly against the counter. Somebody should. Victoria let out a slow breath. Do you know what happens when people get close to me? Marcus shook his head once. Eventually, they want something. Her voice stayed calm, but quieter now. More fragile around the edges. Access. Money. Influence. Security. She laughed softly without humor. Sometimes all four. Marcus listened carefully without interrupting. And after enough years of that, Victoria paused there, staring out across the rain-covered skyline. You start offering things before people even ask. Silence followed immediately, because they both understood what she was really admitting now. The apartment upstairs. The salary. The security contract. None of it had actually been about work. Marcus looked at her for several seconds before speaking again. You know what I think? Victoria turned toward him slowly. Marcus held her gaze calmly. I think somewhere along the way, he paused carefully, you stopped believing your presence alone was enough. Victoria froze completely after that, because nobody had ever explained her life so simply before. And standing there beneath the soft amber lights with rain falling over Manhattan outside, she realized something terrifying. Marcus Hale saw her more clearly after one night than most people had after years. The elevator arrived with a soft chime that sounded strangely loud inside the quiet penthouse. Marcus glanced toward it automatically, then back at Victoria standing near the windows beneath the warm amber lights. For a second, neither of them moved. Rain still covered Manhattan outside, soft and endless now, turning the city below into blurred rivers of gold and silver. Victoria looked smaller than when the night started. Not weak. Just unguarded in ways she clearly was not used to. Marcus slipped his phone from his pocket and checked the time again. 3:46 a.m. Ava would be awake soon. Probably wrapped in her blanket, sleepy-eyed, waiting for pancakes and cartoons before school. The thought softened his expression without him noticing. Victoria noticed anyway. She seemed to notice everything about him now. "Your daughter is lucky," she said quietly. Marcus looked toward her. "Why?" Victoria crossed one arm lightly against herself. "Because she gets the version of you that stays." The words hung between them for a second longer than expected. Marcus understood immediately what she really meant. The room grew quiet again. Victoria looked toward the skyline instead of at him. "Most people leave eventually," she admitted softly. "Even the ones who swear they will not." Marcus stayed calm. "That usually says more about them than you." Victoria laughed quietly under her breath. "You say that like you believe it." "I do." She turned toward him slowly after that. The red dress caught soft city light across the fabric while rain reflected faintly against the glass behind her. "You really are impossible to impress." Marcus almost smiled. "That is not true." "No. I am impressed by honest things." Victoria held his gaze carefully now. "And what counts as honest?" Marcus looked around the penthouse one last time. The impossible view. The marble floors. The silence money could not fix. Then he looked back at her. People who stop pretending they are fine. Victoria's expression shifted quietly at that. Tiny fracture. Tiny relief. That sounds dangerous. Usually is. Silence settled again. But this time it did not feel lonely. Just unfinished. Marcus reached for his jacket resting over the chair near the kitchen island. Victoria watched the movement immediately. Her posture straightened slightly before she could stop herself. "So that is it?" she asked softly. Marcus slid the jacket on slowly. "It is late." "That is not what I meant." He looked toward her calmly. Victoria swallowed once before continuing. "You are really going to walk away from everything I offered?" Marcus stepped toward the elevator at last. "Yeah." Victoria stared at him in complete silence for a second, almost confused, almost frustrated. But deeper than that was something else entirely. "Hurt." "Why?" she asked quietly. Marcus stopped near the elevator doors and looked back at her. "Because I think somewhere along the way," he said softly, "you started believing people only stay when they are paid enough to." Victoria froze. Marcus held her gaze steadily. "And I do not want my daughter growing up believing that love works like a contract." The words landed gently, but they hit harder than anger ever could have. Victoria lowered her eyes immediately after hearing them. Her fingers tightened slightly against her own arm. No defense this time. No billionaire composure. Just silence. Honest silence. The elevator doors opened beside Marcus with a soft mechanical hum. He stepped inside slowly, one hand resting lightly near the panel controls. Victoria finally looked up again. "Marcus." He met her eyes one last time. "Yeah." Rain rolled softly against the glass behind her while Manhattan glowed beneath the storm. Victoria Sterling stood alone inside a penthouse worth more money than most people could imagine, looking at the first man in years who had seen straight through all of it. "Thank you," she whispered softly. Marcus nodded once. Calm. Honest. Then the elevator doors closed between them. Victoria remained standing there long after the sound disappeared. Her phone buzzed again against the marble counter. Investors. Board members. Problems waiting for her attention. She ignored every single one. Because for the first time in years, the thing she could not stop thinking about was not the man who stayed. It was the man who left anyway.